the Dante scholar Teodolinda Barolini wrote, Purgatorio XVIII is a very important canto, particularly to those readers who cherish Dante's origins as a lyric poet, which Dante here evokes in loving detail. He makes clear once more, as he already had in Inferno 5, Canto 5, that the lyric tradition is ethically challenged in one absolutely fundamental tenet. Love is not an irresistible force that removes our free will, as love poets have claimed since time immemorial. Welcome back, everyone, to this series of 100 videos about the Divine Comedy, which I explain without being qualified to explain it to you, aside from being Italian and having a great love for the book and having a great love for Dante. Purgatorio 18, Canto 18 of Purgatorio is really thick with philosophy and theology in a great way, because it talks about love and it talks about freedom. And it's just like Teodolinda Barolini said in this brief introduction, it's incredible how the whole of Purgatorio seems sometimes to me like a wiser Dante explaining to us what we found already in the raw and brutal version in Inferno. In fact, if we think about Canto 5 of Inferno of Paolo and Francesca, those concepts were expressed in a real nutshell over there, and here in Purgatorio 18 they are laid out in a much more sophisticated, much more articulated way, but without that type of young, almost uncontrollable power that Canto 5 had. Canto 18 is based on the fourth terrace and is very clearly divided in two main parts. The first one, where we have Virgil talking about love and freedom to Dante, and the second part where remarkably Dante compressed the entire explanation and description of the Slothful, of the terrace of the Slothful, from the visions of the virtue, the encounter with the Slothful, the vision of the actual vice or sin, and the completion of it. So he really compressed everything in a way that really makes us feel a certain hurry, which is what Dante wanted us to feel. In the first part, he condenses in a mixer. He puts in St. Augustine, Aristotle, the Thomistic philosophy, and St. Thomas, and the scholastic philosophy, and he talks to us about love and freedom, which is really wonderful. The concept of love of all antiquity, from Ovid to Virgil, and all throughout the lyric poets of his young time, when Dante was young, and his own concept of love, the one that he had embraced as a young poet, has a fatal flaw. And this fatal flaw is that it's always been believed by default that love was extra rational. It was completely uncontrollable by rationality, and therefore man had an absolute submission to accept to love, and there was nothing that man could do except from submitting to love. The married knight fell in love with the courtly lady who he saw in a field, fell in love and could do nothing about it. Something like an equivalent of today's modern world office worker or manager who falls in love with the secretary, with new secretary, and there's nothing he can do about it. As I mentioned in previous videos, St. Augustine was very dear to Dante, and in particular on the theme of love. About love in the Confessions, fantastic book by St. Augustine, Augustine says, aside from the distinction between good love and bad love that I already mentioned in the previous two cantos, he also said, "To Carthage then I came, where a cauldron of unholy loves sang all about my ears." Book 3rd of the Confessions. This concept of unholy loves or bad loves, or in any case, any type of movement of the soul that is love, but is going in the wrong direction, really comes from antiquity, and Dante cherished it. Augustine is telling us that love is disordered when it seeks a final happiness, a complete and perfect happiness in sensible things, earthly things. Doing this can generate various pathologies in human beings. In fact, St. Augustine talked about desires that could bring to the destruction of a human soul. Personally, I find the concept of love extremely fascinating, not only on an individual and romantic level, which is always interesting, but also on the social level, because and universal level, because what we love and how and why we love what we love as individuals, but also as a society, tells us the type of society that we are able to build, the type of society that we are in fact building. Structurally and stylistically, and from a point of view that is musical, let's say, this canto has two very important moments of silence. A very important moment of silence at the very beginning with the first tercet or couple of tercets, and then another equally important moment of silence at verse 76 in the middle of the canto. And in between, we have this disquisition by Virgil about love and freedom. And what an original way to start the canto here. The subtle teacher had completed his discourse to me. He had finished speaking to Dante. Attentively, he watched my eyes to see if I seemed satisfied. This is a scene that, in a movie, could last even something like 10 or 15 seconds. It could be very slow and very silent, building tension. And I, still goaded by the new thirst, was silent, without, although within I said, perhaps I have displeased him with too many questions. Dante is alluding at a sort of spiritual sloth here again, reminding us that you can sometimes have sloth or too little love, and so sin in finding justifications, internal justifications, in not pursuing the truth as actively as you should do. But that true father, who had recognized the timid want I would not tell aloud by speaking, gave me courage to speak out. At which I said, Master, I pray you, gentle father dear, dolce padre caro in Italian, dolce padre caro, extremely loving expression, to teach me what love is. You have reduced to love both each good and its opposite. You, Virgil, have talked to me in the previous canto, telling me that everything is coming from love. Everything that is human, all that we do, all that we seek, and all our behaviors are driven by love, both the good ones and the bad ones. So please tell me, what is actually love? Can you please describe? In Italian, he's actually saying, mi dimostri amore, ti prego che mi dimostri amore. He's not asking the same question again. He is simply asking Virgil to expand and further articulate on what he's already told him. And he said, direct your intellect's sharp eyes toward me, and let the error of the blind, who'd serve as guides, be evident to you. We come here to the first really dense tercet. Your intellect sharp eyes toward me, toward Virgil, and let the error of the blind. There is a gospel reference here to Matthew, where Jesus says the Pharisees are blind guides of the blind who follow them. So this blind who guide the blind are, in Dante's interpretation, all those poets and all those thinkers and philosophers, especially contemporary to him, who believed that love was to be intended in the ancient way as love that conquers all things, and that we succumb to, and we have no option to do anything else but succumb to. So this error that Dante is highlighting here at verse 17, let the error of the blind, is actually explained on verse 36. Ciascun amore in sé laudabil cosa. Every type of love is in itself praiseworthy. That is the fatal error. Now, from here, Virgil starts describing in extreme interior detail, in something that could be considered the medieval psychology, the entire process of falling in love. Dante here is following almost by the letter St. Thomas Aquinas, and Aquinas was following Aristotle and St. Augustine a little bit all together. That's why really Dante is putting Thomas, Augustine, and Aristotle all together here. These three main movements that are involved in the falling in love of whenever we fall in love, not simply with another person. He's not only talking about romantic love here, relationship love. He's talking about love in a much broader sense as a universal force. So the soul, which is created quick to love, responds to everything that pleases, just as soon as beauty wakens it to act. This tercet establishes the subject that Virgil will explain, and he will give us this difficult clarification to us and to Dante. He's telling us that this will be about how our rational soul, our mind, reacts to external things as a first step. This refers to the concept of knowledge related to love, because based on Aristotelian philosophy and scholastic philosophy, the act of knowing was always preceding the act of loving. There was something that happened inside of us that was a necessary step of knowing in some way before we could actually love anything. When Dante says beauty wakens it to act, he's referring to the soul moved by this external object from potency to action. And the first step, which is knowledge, involves an abstraction of some kind of the external phenomena into ourselves. So our mind needs to create an abstraction of the object that is reacting to. This actually has echoes of Plato, if we think about the cave, etc., etc. This is really high philosophy coming from Aristotle straight into the Divine Comedy. And this is how the first of these three steps, or these three movements, can be broken down. Your apprehension draws an image from a real object and expands upon that object until soul has turned toward it. This is so important because it's this concept of creating an image, almost creating a negative, like in the photographic process, that the soul can see, and before it can discern, before it can feel if it's attracted to it or not. St. Thomas Aquinas calls these three steps complacentia, motus, and quies. The complacentia is this pleasure that the mind feels at seeing some kind of external object and then creating the abstraction inside. Complacentia, there is a mutual exchange with the outside. Then there is the motus, which is the motion or the action of the soul that turns towards this object. And then finally, the pleasure or the joy, the final stage. And if so turned, the soul tends steadfastly, then the propensity is love, its nature that joins the soul anew through beauty. Therefore, the love is, to answer Dante's question, what is love? Love is the soul's inclination towards another being. And this inclination is what makes the soul turn. Then, and here we move to step number 2, just as flames ascend because the form of fire was fashioned to fly upward toward the stuff of its own sphere, which is the sphere of fire around the earth that was part of Dante's Astronomy. And so fire is naturally attracted to the sphere of fire, where it lasts longest, because it was believed that fire was attracted to the sphere of fire because that's where it would last longer. So does the soul, when seized, move into longing, a motion of the spirit, never resting till the beloved thing has made it joyous. And this is the third step, the quiet and the joy that comes from reaching this object. So first we have this photograph of the object. Then we have the soul that is a second movement that turns towards the object if it feels love towards it. And then finally, through a process that is driven by desire, because there is a constant feeling of wanting to reach this object in any possible way. When the object is reached, then there is a joy and quiet. And when the soul reaches this type of quiet, love doesn't stop. It's, in fact, the desire, the sense of longing that actually stops. The simile of the fire is crucial here for two main reasons. One, Dante wants to draw our attention towards the difference between the natural attraction that inanimate things feel towards other things, like the fire feels this natural attraction towards the sphere of fire. The difference between that and our soul, an animate thing or animate object. Fire, of course, doesn't have any freedom, any free will, but human beings do. That's the difference that Dante wants to highlight also with this simile. Now you can plainly see how deeply hidden truth is from scrutinists who would insist that every love is in itself praiseworthy, and this is the error of the blind. And they are led to error by the matter of love, because it may seem always good. But not each seal is fine, although the wax is. The wax might be great, of great quality, but the seal made with the wax might not be always good. Fantastic way to repeat the concept with a great simile or metaphor, and at the same time also probably throw a little shade towards the papacy, towards the Pope. These scrutinists that Mandelbaum translates, Dante says simply la veritate alla gente c'avvera, and this is people who believe this to be true, this error to be true. And as I mentioned before, he's thinking of mainly his contemporaries who were following this default position like he did himself, because he actually wrote letters as a young poet to other people where he specifically said, look, when it comes to love, there is nothing you can do. Love is a complete wave that will overcome you, and you have no power over it ever at all in your life, in your behaviors. And of course, Dante changed his mind during his life. He developed and he grew out of that position. But here he's thinking about poets like Cavalcanti, Guizinelli. Cavalcanti was his good friend for a long period of time, who were writing courtly love poems. And in these courtly love poems, the love was inevitably something that men just succumbed to. There was nothing to do about it. At this point, Dante intervenes. He is happy with the explanation, but he wants Virgil to push the argument further. And he says, for if love is offered to us from without and is the only foot with which soul walks, so it's the only foot with which soul walks, then soul, going straight or crooked in either direction, has no merit. So is it true that really there is nothing is imputable to the soul? Soul doesn't have, and personally, I find it a little bit strange that Dante asked this question without being reprimanded by Virgil in this particular occasion, because he already listened to the monologue by Marco Lombardi, where Marco Lombardi, only in Canto 16, told him about free will, the importance of personal responsibility, and the fact that we are not just leaves in the wind, etc., as human beings. So I find it a little bit strange that Dante asked this question. It seems like he should already know the answer to this, and Virgil doesn't really pick up on that. Virgil just keeps explaining. Virgil says, what reason can see here, I can impart. Past that, for truth or faith, is Beatrice alone you must await, like he already said before. Every substantial form, at once distinct from matter and conjoined to it, ingathers the force that is distinctively its own, the substantial form that at the same time is distinct from matter and conjoined to it is only one, and that's the human soul. There's nothing else that has these characteristics. A force unknown to us until it acts. It's never shown except in its effects. Just like as green boughs display the life in plants. This is the simile taken from the world of vegetation and plants. And thus man does not know the source of his intelligence. Philosophy doesn't know the source of this intelligence, but theology, incarnated in Beatrice, does know that because it's been revealed. The intelligence of primal notions, and he's tending towards desires primal objects. So what are these primal notions and these primal objects? Dante calls them le prime notizie in Italian and the primi appetibili. The difference is the primal notions are these primary principles, intellectual principles, that Aristotle already talked about a lot. For example, the concept of being, the concept of non-contradiction, all these concepts that Aristotle considers self-evident, that we are born knowing and understanding, but without being able to say why. So it's just part of our nature to know them. Just like it's part of our nature to be attracted by these primal objects. So from the point of view of the attraction, the primal objects are the objects towards which our will is trending, is attracted to by its own nature. Both these objects are in you, just as in bees there is the honey-making urge. It's something that comes together with the package. The package of the bees has something, the package of the human being has primal notions and primal objects. Such primal will deserves no praise and it deserves no blame. So we could say, so far so good. Until here, everything is in line with what Dante has always believed, as a young Dante, as an older Dante. This was the agreement, the general consensus of how, let's say, love and the human will worked. This is in line. Now, and this is actually what Virgil says in Italian as well, or, which means ora, now. I'm going to tell you what the crux of the matter is. Now that all other longings may conform to this first will, there is in you, inborn, the power that counsels, keeper of the threshold of your ascent. Fantastic simile here of our free will as a guardian, our free will as a keeper of the threshold of your ascent. Innata ve la virtù che consiglia e dell'ascenso di tener la soglia. La soglia is the door, the gate. And this is the principle on which your merit may be judged. So here we have responsibility. Those reasoners who reached the root of things learned of this inborn freedom. The bequest that thus they left unto the world is ethics. Clear reference to the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. And here we come to the grand finale of this dissertation, brief dissertation. Even if we allow necessity as source for every love that flames in you, s'accende, to refer to fire again, the power to curb that love is still your own. This line is the central one. Di ritenerlo è in voi la potestate. The power to curb that love is still your own. This exists. There is a power to direct this incredible force that we have in ourselves that's called love. So it's false, it's mistaken to think that we don't have this power. We do have it, and we can be judged on it, on how we use it. This noble power is what Beatrice means by free will. Therefore, remember it if she should ever speak of it to you. So it sounds like it's a matter of fine-tuning, almost like an orchestra director. We need to use this power and these forces that we have inside ourselves to find the right type of harmony. If they are not in harmony with the outside, with the objects that surround us, then we are invaded by this bad love, and we give space to the wrong kind of love. We let love go in the wrong direction, and there is a dissonance. The the music doesn't play properly. Dante has always been insisting on this natural inclination of man towards good, and ultimately, good is represented by God. So it's not a matter of making up the direction of this harmony. It's not a matter of we can go anywhere and it doesn't matter. We have a natural attraction, a natural inclination towards the good. So really, Dante is repeating St. Thomas. And this is crucial because our nature under this light is helping us go the right direction. We are not left completely blind. And of course, then there is grace, which is the divine action. So here, Dante, the director, we could say, cuts to a scene where we can see a beautiful moon up in the sky. We remember we are during the night here on the fourth terrace of Sloth. There is this pause, this silence, this probably time to chew on what Virgil has been talking about. And the moon, with midnight now behind us, made the stars seem scarcer to us. It was shaped just like a copper basin, gleaming new. Very interesting paragon here, very interesting simile. We should imagine it as this, in Italian it's called paiolo, really. It's those big bowls where we cook polenta in Italy. And we should imagine the moon lit up in its lower portion, the central portion and lower portion. Across those paths the sun ignites when those in Rome can see it set between the Corsicans and the Sardinians. So right now, the moon is in the area or path that is taken by the sun and at the end of November, where in the sky, in that area of the sky, the Sagittarius constellation is visible. This means that we are at the end of the fourth day of the entire Divine Comedy. Remember, the Divine Comedy lasts for 7 days. And we are at the end of the fourth day. And of course, during this time, the moon has also changed its place in the sky. Dante is trying to follow these astronomical directions. The gracious shade from whom Pietola won more renown. This Pietola is simply the town, the small town where Virgil was coming from, which is very close to Mantova. Virgil is from Mantova, but Pietola is exactly the little village where he was from. So that I, having harvested his clear answers to my questions, stood like one who nearing sleep has random visions, says Mandelbaum. This is not precisely what Dante says in Italian. In Italian, Dante says, stava com'om che sonnolento vana, somebody who follows disconnected thoughts and vague and disconnected thoughts. Maybe literally that's what Dante says. But readiness for sleep was suddenly taken from me by people who behind our backs already turned in our direction. Here we come to the very compressed part where Dante gives us his handling of sloth. The reference to these two rivers, Ismenus and Asopus, comes probably from the Thebaid, from Statius. And these two rivers were flowing in the area of Thebes. And they basically used to do orgiastic rites and runs along the rivers during the night. This is an image from the classical world of mythology to describe what, with a modern image, we could imagine us walking on a sidewalk and being almost run over by a crowd of marathon runners, or this 5K, 10K sort of runners or urban runners that are so fashionable in these days. That's what Dante is faced with here. Just people who, obviously, these are the slothful and they are purifying their souls here in Purgatorio by contrapasso, by being urged to run around in a hurry. The way in which the sins of virtue and the sins of sin are actually explained here is a little bit different, but it seems like Dante has exhausted the extremely imaginative ways that he's been using for the previous terraces. And so here he uses the two runners on top of the group, in front of the group, who are shouting the two visions. And he will do the same with the two at the back, who are going to shout the vices for everybody to meditate upon. The concept of sloth is in fact countered by a certain, what we could call, holy haste, that as always is represented by Mary first. And it's very beautiful, this episode from the Gospel of Luke that is recalled here. In her journey, Mary made haste to reach the mountain. And Mary made haste to reach the mountain. This is an episode where Mary was informed that Elizabeth, who lived in the mountain in a region called Hebron, she knew that Elizabeth was pregnant. And so she went in haste to visit her, probably to help her as well. But this haste brings with itself a certain joy and an eagerness to be useful, to be close in a very altruistic way. Another example of haste in the positive sense is Caesar, who is in fact Julius Caesar here, who is referred here in an example of his various wars, but in a way that is clarified by the end of the canto as yet another way for Dante to give us his very dear concept that he keeps returning to, of the two sons, of the separation between church and state, and these two sons that should rule and regulate human activity and human society, the empire and the church. Mary in the Gospel of Luke is alluded to because the Gospel is written in a very polysemic way. So somebody who really understands it and has been studying the Gospel, not me, but I read that Luke uses a language that refers to the Old Testament in a way that makes it clear that Luke is referring to Mary just in the same way that ancient Hebrews were referring to the Holy Ark, to the Ark of the Alliance. And so, just like the Ark brought the law into Jerusalem, Mary is like the Ark who brings the Savior inside herself into the world. On verse 118, Dante mentions the San Zeno Abbot. I've been to visit San Zeno. It's a beautiful, beautiful abbey with a kind of annex monastery. And I'm going to show some pictures because it's so lovely and a beautiful place. The reason why Dante mentions it is, he says, because this is the actual soul who he meets there, running through without even stopping. I was the abbot of San Zeno in Verona under the rule of valiant Barbarossa. This Barbarossa is in fact Frederick I, who was the grandfather of Frederick II. Valiant Barbarossa, of whom Milan still speaks with so much sorrow, reference to the fact that in year 1162, Frederick had destroyed Milan because of the anti-imperial politics they were brewing in Milan. He destroyed the city. And this particular abbot who is speaking here, this character that Dante brings up, his name was Gherardo II. He served under Frederick I. What's really important in this conclusion of the canto is the way Dante, let's say, wraps up this concept of the two sons. He has mentioned Mary and Julius Caesar as examples of virtue, of haste, of going in a hurry, but in a positive sense. And here, as if to highlight and repeat the concept that he's actually talking about spiritual power, religion on one hand, and temporal power and empire on the other, he is mentioning two episodes. One, the ones for whom the sea parted were dead before the Jordan saw those who had inherited his lands. An example of sloth of the Jewish people where before the Jordan saw those who had inherited its lands, who decided to stop following Moses because they were too tired, and almost all of them perished because of this decision. And the second one is the ones who did not suffer trials until the end, together with Anchises' son, gave themselves up to life without renown. These are the Trojans who, in their trip from Troy towards Italy, the Italian peninsula, a group of them decided to stop in Sicily. There was a group of them who actually sinned of sloth coming back from Troy. So two examples really of the two worlds, one the spiritual and religious one, and one the imperial one. The concluding two tercets are just a wonderful poem in themselves. They're really poetic, really beautiful. Then when those shades were so far off from us, Dante is taken by a certain drowsiness. He is drawn from random thought to thought. That wandering in mind, I shut my eyes, transforming thought on thought to dream. And in the beginning of the next canto, we will see what Dante is going to dream. Thanks again, everyone. If you followed so far, it's really a pleasure to go on with you, and we'll speak soon for Canto 19.